They planned the perfect war, every detail, every move meticulously calculated. The enemy was powerful, their forces overwhelming, and their technology far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. The invaders had studied every aspect of human history, every battle we'd fought, every mistake we'd made. They believed they knew exactly how to wipe us out. But they couldn't have been more wrong. From the moment their ships descended, humanity's fate seemed sealed. These beings were nothing like us. They didn't fear, they didn't hesitate, and they certainly didn't understand what made us different. They thought our bodies were fragile, our resolve weak. They underestimated the one thing that had kept humanity alive for millennia, our unbreakable will to survive. They assumed that, just like every other species they'd conquered, we would bend to their will without so much as a fight. But as they began their assault, it didn't take long for them to realize their mistake. They had no idea what they were walking into. As the first battles unfolded, the invaders quickly found themselves caught off guard. Every strike they delivered seemed to awaken something deep within humanity, a primal instinct to push back, to resist, to fight for survival. In the face of overwhelming odds, when the rest of the galaxy might have crumbled, humanity didn't flinch. We adapted. We endured. And soon, we began to show them that war with humans wasn't a game they could simply plan out on a map. The invaders thought their technology, their advanced weapons, and their seemingly unbeatable forces would make short work of us. But what they didn't anticipate was our ability to improvise, to adapt to new situations, to use whatever was at our disposal. Where they saw weakness, we saw opportunity. Where they saw destruction, we saw resolve. And as the tide of battle shifted ever so slightly in our favor, they realized something even worse than defeat. The humans they had dismissed were now the ones calling the shot. But the invaders weren't ready to give up. As the war raged on, they grew desperate. Their tactics, once flawless, began to falter as they faced off against humanity's unpredictability. They adapted, sure, but not in the ways they thought possible. The more they tried to crush us, the more we fought back with a tenacity they couldn't comprehend. It became clear this wasn't a war they could win through brute force alone. In a last-ditch effort, the invaders attempted to break our resolve. They targeted our cities, our homes, our families, everything we held dear. They thought this would break us, that we would crumble under the weight of their onslaught. But as the skies filled with their weapons, as the earth shook with their firepower, we did something they hadn't prepared for. We dug in. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. We refused to break. And that refusal made all the difference. The invaders, who thought they had the perfect war planned out, were now scrambling to keep up with a humanity that refused to fall. And in their desperation, they made a fatal mistake. What happens when an enemy can't predict you, can't control you? What happens when they realize they're not the ones in charge? The answer, though yet unseen, will change everything. As the invaders regrouped and began to plan their next move, one thing became certain: humanity had just begun to show them what we were capable of. The question now was not if we could win, but how far we were willing to go to ensure our survival. What would the invaders do next? Would they adjust their plans, or would they finally acknowledge that they were up against something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined? As the war dragged on, both sides had reached a breaking point. Humanity's relentless spirit had turned the tide of battle, and the invaders, once so confident in their superiority, were now reeling. But just as victory seemed within reach, an unexpected shift rattled everything. The invaders, who had been known for their cold, calculated tactics, unveiled a weapon that no one could have foreseen, a weapon that didn't just attack the body, but the mind itself. It was called the ether pulse, a devastating energy wave capable of scrambling thoughts, erasing memories, and turning even the most hardened fighters into terrified, confused shells of themselves. The first wave hit the planet like a silent storm. For a brief moment, everything stopped: the soldiers on the front lines, the civilians in shelters, and even the commanders who'd been leading humanity's resistance, all suddenly frozen in a haze. The very essence of what made humanity strong, our determination, our will to fight, our sense of self, began to unravel before our eyes. Those who had fought so fiercely now faced a new battle within their own minds. In the wake of this brutal strike, the invaders thought they had finally found the key to victory. Without their minds intact, the human resistance would crumble. But what they hadn't accounted for was the strange resilience of human consciousness. While the ether pulse had indeed caused mass chaos, it had not broken humanity's core spirit. Some, even under the pulse's influence, began to fight back, gathering fragments of their memories, pushing through the confusion with a strength that defied logic. Among the affected, one individual stood out, a leader, a symbol of humanity's defiance, whose mind, despite the invasive waves of the ether pulse, refused to break. Even with most of their memories erased, the instinct to fight, to lead, surged from the deepest corners of their mind. It was as though the very idea of surrender was an alien concept. They rallied those around them, assembling a resistance from the fragments of their own mind and the collective will of those who could still think clearly. As the ether pulse began to cycle again, more and more humans found themselves fighting to retain their identity, to resist the invaders' influence. Some fought with weapons, others with words, and others still with a defiance that wasn't quite understood, even by them. The invaders' shock at humanity's resilience grew as they watched their carefully constructed victory slip through their fingers. But then the twist came. It was a turn in the war that no one could have predicted. The invaders, who'd been relying on their superior technology and their new weapon to win, learned that the ether pulse had an unintended side effect. It wasn't just humans who were affected. The invaders' own forces, whose minds were tightly controlled by their leaders, were now beginning to experience strange lapses in memory and coordination. They had expected to dominate humanity's minds, but instead, their own soldiers began to question their orders, their purpose, their loyalty. For the first time since the beginning of the war, cracks appeared in the invaders' unity. Some soldiers, unable to withstand the mental chaos, began to defect, even turning against their own leaders. The invaders, who had once thought themselves the pinnacle of evolution, now faced a division within their ranks, a division that mirrored the fractures in humanity's own defenses. The chaos of the ether pulse was now working against them, and they couldn't reverse it. The one thing they hadn't accounted for was the mental fortitude of beings who, despite everything, refused to break. The war had shifted again. What had once been a battle for survival had now become a battle for the very minds of those involved. Humanity was beginning to see the first signs of a new hope, a way to fight not just with weapons, but with the strength of the mind itself. However, this newfound hope came at a cost. The damage caused by the ether pulse was widespread, and many of those who fought to retain their sanity were now struggling to rebuild their own fractured identities. Even the humans who had managed to keep their grip on reality were facing psychological battles of their own. As the invaders' forces splintered, it became clear that the war was far from over. The stakes had escalated. The invaders had hoped to control humanity through force and technology, but now they were battling an enemy whose resilience was like nothing they had ever seen. The war was no longer about weapons and armies. It was about survival, and it was about the strength of the human mind. But as the resistance grew stronger, so did the invaders' desperation. The next phase of the conflict would be unlike anything humanity had ever faced. With the invaders scrambling to regain control over their forces, and with human minds growing stronger through the chaos, one question hung over the battlefield. Would the invaders ever truly understand the force they were up against? Or would they continue to underestimate humanity, driving us to yet another unexpected victory? The stage was set for a confrontation that would push both sides to the brink, and one that would determine not only the future of the war, but the future of everything humanity had ever known. Would we rise above the mental chaos and reclaim our future? Or would the invaders finally crush the spark of resistance once and for all? The next move could change everything. The battle had reached a boiling point. The invaders' forces, once so dominant and precise, were now scattered, their ranks torn apart by the very weapon they had used to control humanity. As the final remnants of their army regrouped, their leaders realized the truth they had denied all along. This wasn't just a war for resources or power. It was a war for the heart of their empire, and the humans they had underestimated were now the ones leading the charge. But even as the invaders struggled to hold on to their fractured forces, something darker loomed. The last ether pulse had been their greatest gamble, and it had failed. Instead of breaking humanity's will, it had strengthened it. The invaders were losing control, and yet they were too far gone to retreat. The human resistance, guided by an unspoken bond forged in the fires of war, pressed forward relentlessly, forcing their enemies into an ever-shrinking corner. But as the tide of battle surged in humanity's favor, something strange began to happen, and even greater power was awakening within the humans. With each passing hour, as the invaders' technological advantage crumbled under the weight of human ingenuity and resistance, a new force took hold. It wasn't just their minds that had adapted, but something deeper, something far older within humanity had begun to rise. There was a collective force in humanity that no technology, no weapon, could ever defeat: the unyielding power of unity. The human resistance, driven by the shared desire to protect not just themselves, but each other, had become more than an army. It had become a single, unstoppable entity, a living, breathing force. Just when it seemed like victory was within reach, the invaders made their final, desperate move. They triggered their most destructive weapon, a massive, planet-shattering device that would wipe out every human on the planet, leaving nothing but dust in its wake. It was a last-ditch effort to end the war and their failures. But humanity, as always, found a way to fight back. Through sheer force of will, a group of surviving engineers and soldiers managed to infiltrate the invaders' command ship, breaking through their defenses and sabotaging the device just moments before it would have detonated. The battle culminated in a final stand, a brutal clash between the invaders' remaining forces and the human resistance, which now seemed fueled by something beyond physical strength, something almost supernatural. The human army surged forward, united by the memories of all those who had fallen, the unspoken promise to never give in, no matter the odds. And in that defining moment, the invaders finally realized they had underestimated the wrong species. As their command ship fell from the sky in a fiery explosion, the surviving invader forces scrambled to escape, but they were too late. The human resistance had not only fought back, but they had completely dismantled the power the invaders once held over them. The world that had been on the brink of destruction now stood in defiance, untouched and alive. The invaders, having lost their hold on the planet, were left with no choice but to retreat, their empire forever changed by the unrelenting human spirit. The aftermath was nothing short of miraculous. What had once been a desperate battle for survival had transformed into a victorious moment for humanity. But in the quiet aftermath of war, as the dust settled and the survivors began to rebuild, one question lingered in the minds of the humans who had fought so hard: how had they won? What had allowed them to push back against an enemy so powerful, so advanced? The answer, though not obvious at first, became clear in the days that followed. It was not their weapons, their technology, or their ability to adapt. It was something simpler. It was the human will to survive, to fight for the lives of others, to never back down. It was the strength that lay in every individual who refused to be broken. In the end, it was humanity's greatest weapon, our hearts, that had won the war. But the final twist came when the first remnants of the invaders' survivors returned to their homeworld, their once proud empire shattered. On their way back, they made a startling discovery, something they had not anticipated. As the ether pulse had affected their forces, so too had it begun to slowly alter their very species. They were changing. Their minds, their biology, had become more attuned to humanity's unique resilience. Their bodies, once superior, now mirrored those they had once enslaved. They had begun to evolve, becoming something else. It was a chilling realization. In their effort to conquer humanity, they had unknowingly made us their equals. They had tried to break us, to control us, only to find themselves irreversibly altered. What began as a battle for survival had turned into something far more profound, the reshaping of both civilizations. And as the humans celebrated their victory, they knew one thing for sure: their enemies, once proud and powerful, were now learning the hard way that humanity was not just a species to conquer. It was a force to be reckoned with. The story ended with a quiet reflection on what had been lost and what had been gained. The war was over, but the effects would ripple across time for generations. Humanity had faced the impossible and had won, not with advanced technology, not with superior weapons, but with something far more powerful: the unshakable will to survive. And as the last remnants of the invaders retreated into the unknown, humanity stood tall, knowing that no force, no matter how powerful, could ever defeat the human spirit.